Imagine walking into a crowded marketplace 1,000 years ago. You don't know who's friendly. You don't know who's dangerous. You don't even know what rules this town lives by. But then you notice something hanging on a man's chest as he turns toward you, heavy, simple, unmistakable. A hammer. Not a tool. Not a decoration. A message. Because in the Viking Age, Thor's hammer wasn't just a symbol. It was a public signal that spoke before you did. It could tell strangers what you believed, who you trusted, and what kind of protection you thought was watching over you. And depending on the place and the moment in history, that hammer could mean comfort, or conflict. So today, I want to show you why Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, was never just jewelry. It was identity. It was protection. And during one of the most tense cultural changes in Northern Europe, it became something even bigger. It became a statement. Let's start with the version most people know. When people think of Thor, they think of thunder, lightning, and raw strength. A god who hits first and asks questions later. A bigger-than-life warrior figure. And yes, Thor was strong. But in Norse belief, he wasn't simply a violent storm god. Thor was a defender. He was the protector of the human world. In Norse stories, the universe isn't a calm, peaceful place. It's a place balanced between order and chaos. And Thor stands at the border of that chaos. He fights what threatens the world of people, forces that represent danger, destruction, and disorder. That idea matters, because it changes what the hammer meant. Mjolnir wasn't only Thor's weapon. It was the symbol of protection. It was the thing that kept the world from falling apart. And when a symbol carries that kind of meaning, wearing it is not a casual choice. It's like walking around with a sign that says, "I believe the world is dangerous, and I know who defends me." Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. We often imagine Viking symbols as things meant for warriors, battle banners, war paint, intimidating trophies. But Thor's hammer wasn't only for the battlefield. In Norse tradition, the hammer wasn't just used to destroy. It was also used to bless. In the old world, people didn't separate life into neat categories the way we do today. Religion wasn't something you did for 1 hour on a special day. It was woven into the events of life. Birth. Marriage. Travel. Harvest. Death. And the hammer appears again and again as a sign of consecration, meaning it made something sacred, protected, and set apart. Think about what that implies. It means Mjolnir wasn't just about power. It was about order. It was about saying, this moment matters. This place is guarded. This bond is real. So when someone wore a hammer pendant, they weren't just saying, Thor is cool. They were saying, I live under this system. I respect this way of seeing the world. I belong to this story. And the more you think about it, the more you realize that jewelry in the Viking Age wasn't just style. It was communication. A lot of people today live in a world where you can hide what you believe. You can blend in. You can keep your opinions private. But in small communities and trading towns of the past, people watched each other. They judged. They noticed. They remembered. If you wore something around your neck, it wasn't invisible. It spoke. A hammer could say, I'm from the north. It could say, I follow the old gods. It could say, I'm part of this community. And it could also serve as a kind of invisible shield, because if Thor was the defender of people, then wearing his hammer was like carrying his protection with you. Imagine the Viking world for a moment. You travel by sea in unpredictable storms. You walk through wild terrain. You deal with sickness with little real medicine. You face raids, feuds, and sudden violence. In a world like that, protection isn't a luxury. It's a daily need. So a hammer pendant could be spiritual armor. A way of saying, I'm not facing this alone. But there's another layer to this story, one that turns the hammer from a personal symbol into a public statement. And it happens during a time of change. A time when Northern Europe was shifting. A time when old beliefs and new beliefs collided. Because during the Viking Age and the centuries that followed, Christianity spread through Scandinavia. Sometimes slowly through trade and contact. Sometimes quickly through kings and politics. Sometimes peacefully. Sometimes violently. And when that happened, symbols became louder. They stopped being background details. They became signs of allegiance. You've probably seen images of Viking crosses, or you've heard that Vikings eventually became Christian. That's true. But the transition wasn't like flipping a switch. It was messy. It was uneven. And for a long time, people lived in a world where two religious identities existed side by side. Now picture it again. You're living in a town where some people wear a cross. Some people wear a hammer. And everyone understands what those symbols suggest. In that world, a pendant isn't just a personal comfort. It's a signal to other people. It's a statement of where you stand. So the hammer becomes something more. It becomes a kind of wearable announcement: I am not switching. Or, I still honor the old ways. Or, I'm not sure, but I'm holding on to what I know. In some places and times, it could even say, I resist what's coming. That's what it means when we say the hammer was a message. Not only a mythic symbol, but a social one. A political one. A public identity marker. And here's something fascinating. In certain periods, hammer pendants seem to become more visible precisely when Christianity is spreading. That suggests something powerful. When a new belief system arrives, people don't always quietly accept it. Sometimes they respond by holding up their old identity even higher. Like raising a flag. Like wearing a badge. Like making sure everybody sees. And that's exactly what the hammer could become. Now, it gets even more complicated, because not everyone lived in a simple hammer versus cross world. Some people blended. Some people adapted. Some people wore symbols that could be read in more than one way. There are even objects and pendants that, depending on shape and design, could look a bit like a cross, or like a hammer. And in a world of shifting identities, that ambiguity could be useful. Because maybe you're a trader who wants to be safe in both Christian and pagan areas. Maybe you live under a Christian king but your family still honors Thor. Maybe you're trying to survive a changing world without making enemies. In that situation, jewelry becomes strategic. It's not just what you believe. It's what you want others to think you believe. And that alone should tell you how serious symbols were. But let's zoom out even more. Religion in this era wasn't only about spiritual ideas. It was also about power. As Scandinavian kingdoms grew more centralized, kings wanted unity. They wanted shared laws, shared authority, shared loyalty. And conversion to Christianity often tied rulers into wider European networks, alliances, trade, legitimacy, and influence. So if you resisted conversion, you weren't just resisting a new god. You might be resisting new authority. New taxes. New rules. New social structures. So that small hammer around your neck could carry an even bigger message. It could say, my loyalty is local. Or, I belong to the old community. Or even, I don't accept the new order. Now, that doesn't mean every person wearing a hammer was some kind of revolutionary. For many, it was simpler. It was comfort. It was tradition. It was protection. But the point is, the symbol operated in a world where meaning was understood by other people. And that's what makes it powerful. Because a symbol becomes a message when it's legible to the crowd. In modern life, we sometimes forget how that feels. We wear symbols for personal reasons, fashion reasons, aesthetic reasons. But in the Viking world, identity could shape survival. If you were traveling, what you wore could influence how you were treated. If you were trading, it could shape trust. If you were in a tense region, it could shape danger. So let's return to that marketplace image from the beginning. You're a stranger. You're scanning faces. You want to know who you can deal with. You see the hammer. And immediately, you know something. You know what story this person belongs to. You know what values he might respect. You know what protection he thinks matters. And you also know what kind of world he might want to keep alive. That's the message. And the hammer carried another meaning too, one that's easy to overlook. It wasn't only about the wearer. It was about the people around them. Because symbols don't just tell you what someone believes. They also tell you what someone expects from you. A hammer can be a warning. Not necessarily a threat, but a boundary. A way of saying, these are my people. These are my gods. These are my rules. And in a time of cultural change, boundaries matter. Now, let's address a modern misunderstanding. Today, Thor's hammer shows up everywhere: movies, merchandise, gym shirts, tattoos, jewelry shops, online aesthetics. For a lot of people, it's become a simple Viking logo. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying history or enjoying symbols. But the danger happens when we flatten history. When we treat a symbol like it has only one meaning. Because historically, the hammer didn't mean just one thing. It could mean protection. It could mean blessing. It could mean identity. It could mean loyalty. It could mean resistance. It could mean, I belong. It could mean, I won't be moved. And that's why it was powerful. Because it could be carried quietly, but understood loudly. Now here's a final thought that ties it all together. In a harsh world, people don't cling to symbols for no reason. They cling to them because symbols help you feel anchored. They help you feel guarded. They remind you that you're part of something larger than your own fear. That's why a hammer pendant mattered to a traveler crossing dangerous waters. That's why it mattered to a family worried about sickness. That's why it mattered in a world where storms could destroy everything you had. And that's why it mattered even more when the world started changing around them, when new faith and new authority began to reshape the North. The hammer wasn't only a myth. It was a message. A message that said, this is who I am. A message that said, this is what I trust. A message that said, this is the world I belong to. So next time you see Thor's hammer, don't just think Viking symbol. Think of it as a small object carrying a loud statement, worn close to the heart, but meant to be seen. And if you enjoyed this deeper dive into Viking symbols and hidden meanings, subscribe for more. In the next videos, we'll break down other Norse symbols people misunderstand, and what they really meant in the world they came from. And tell me in the comments, if you lived in that era, would you wear the hammer, the cross, or both?